Grace Thompson, a talented black chef, is reduced to just a waitress in an elite restaurant. She faces daily humiliation and disregard from customers and colleagues alike. But when a world-famous food critic inadvertently tastes her dish and falls in love with it, Grace sees a fleeting chance to break free from the shadows. What follows is a battle not just for respect, but for survival in an industry that judges her by her appearance rather than her talent. Grace reclaims her rightful place in the kitchen as she faces prejudice and fierce opposition. How she transforms her life, and the lives of those who belittled her, will shock everyone. Grace Thompson had perfected the art of staying unnoticed. Every day she worked at the Crystal and Vine restaurant, where she refilled wine glasses, cleared plates, and smiled at the wealthy diners who hardly noticed her at all. She had learned that no matter how seamlessly she worked, she was just the waitress. To some of these patrons, she was simply there to serve and attend to their needs. The restaurant was a high-end place where famous people and wealthy business leaders often dined, making it one of the most desirable spots in the city. Its reputation for luxury and elegance was evident in every dish served. But for Grace, working there felt more like a struggle than a dream. Even though she had trained at a prestigious culinary school and had experience as a sous chef in a well-known kitchen, here, she was just a waitress, often unnoticed and undervalued. Each day, Grace felt the heavy weight of unspoken judgments around her. Some customers wouldn't even look at her, as if recognizing her presence would disrupt their privileged bubble. Others were more obvious in their discomfort, their eyes lingering on her dark skin, showing a mix of disdain and pity. Despite these daily trials, Grace never wavered in her commitment to her job. She pushed aside her frustration, set aside her dreams, and continued to serve, hoping for a chance, any chance, that would allow her to showcase her true potential. What she didn't realize was that her moment of opportunity was closer than she could have ever imagined. Grace faced challenges every day at her job, but she had learned to keep her feelings in check. She had seen how other workers were called out for their mistakes, and she understood that she couldn't risk losing her job. Her boss, Daniel, often picked on her, always reminding her of her position. No matter how hard and fast she worked or how well she managed her tasks at the restaurant, to him, she was just a waitress, and he wasn't the only one who thought that way. One evening, while she was serving customers, a rude old man yelled at her. "Excuse me, you forgot to refill my glass," he said with impatience. Grace approached him, carefully pouring the wine, determined to keep her hands steady despite his glare. "A little slow, aren't we?" he added, smirking. His wife laughed, enjoying her husband's belittling behavior. Grace held back her annoyance, smiled, and walked away. This wasn't the first time she had been treated like this, and it wouldn't be the last. Looking around, she saw Daniel watching her, a pleased look on his face. He relished these moments when he could remind her of her place. Grace understood exactly what he thought. She was meant to be just a server and nothing more. That night, as she retreated to the kitchen to catch her breath, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Can you imagine if someone like her worked in the kitchen?" Daniel said, laughing. Michael, the head chef, chuckled. "No way. The kitchen's no place for someone like her." Grace's hands clenched into fists. They didn't know her background. They didn't know she had trained at a top culinary school, that she had once been a respected sous chef, or that she had worked under some of the best chefs in the country. But to them, she was just a waitress, a shadow in the background. Her anger simmered, but she forced herself to take deep breaths. She couldn't afford to lose her composure. As her eyes wandered across the back room, a small notice caught her attention. "Special guest dining tomorrow evening, Critic Martin Lang." She recognized him right away. He was a famous food critic, someone that everyone in the restaurant business both admired and dreaded. His reviews could either lift a restaurant to success or lead to its downfall. At that moment, Grace suddenly had a brilliant idea. Grace felt a surge of determination. This was her moment to shine. If she could just present one amazing dish to Lang, she knew she could demonstrate her true cooking skills to everyone. However, the task ahead was daunting. She needed to cook without raising any suspicions from Daniel or Michael. If they found out what she was up to, they would do everything they could to stop her. That night, as she lay in bed, her thoughts buzzed with ideas. She reminisced about the comforting meals her grandmother used to prepare, the delicious flavors from her childhood that ignited her passion for cooking. Grace imagined a dish that would combine her traditional heritage with the new cooking techniques she had recently learned. It had to be nothing short of perfect. The next evening, the restaurant buzzed with nervous energy. The staff moved with urgency, adjusting napkins, shining silverware, ensuring that everything was in place. In the kitchen, Michael barked orders, his usual arrogance now laced with anxiety. "I want everything to be perfect tonight," he said, pacing. "Lang will tear us apart if we don't impress him." Grace observed from the sidelines, waiting for her moment. As the busy dinner rush continued, Grace saw her chance. When Michael stepped away for a moment, she quickly slipped into the kitchen. With skillful hands, she gathered some fresh herbs, garlic, and a little lemon juice, moving swiftly but carefully. Each action was purposeful, and she aimed to create a dish full of flavor. Just as she finished arranging the meal on the plate, Michael returned. He stopped in surprise, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked sharply. Grace's heart raced, but she took a deep breath and replied, "I thought this could be a special treat for Mr. Lang." Michael frowned, but then she noticed a hint of curiosity in his eyes. He paused, then took a small bite of the dish. There was a moment of silence and she could see the surprise on his face. He didn't say it out loud, but she could tell he liked it. "Serve it," he said quietly, passing the plate to the sous chef. Grace sighed with relief. The dish was on its way to Mr. Lang, and now all she could do was wait. As Grace stood behind the service counter, she anxiously watched as the dish she had prepared arrived at Martin Lang's table. Lang was a famous food critic known for being very honest in his reviews. He sat quietly in a corner of the restaurant, his expression hard to read as he picked up his fork. Grace felt her heart race as he took his first bite. Lang paused for a moment. His chewing slowed down, and his eyebrows raised slightly. Then he took another bite, and a third. It seemed like he was really enjoying it, savoring each mouthful. Grace clutched the edge of the counter, her hands shaking with a mix of excitement and nervousness. This dish was her creation, her flavors, her story. Everything she wanted to express was right there on that plate. And judging by Lang's subtle reaction, it seemed to be connecting with him in the way she had hoped. On the other side of the room, Daniel noticed Lang's response. His usual confident look changed to one of curiosity and anxiety. He straightened his suit and walked over to the critic's table, trying to appear charming. "Is everything to your liking, Mr. Lang?" he asked, feigning warmth in his voice. Lang nodded but kept his eyes focused on his plate. "Yes, but this dish, it's really something special," he said thoughtfully. "It's honest, simple, not what I expected from here." Then he looked up and asked, "Who prepared this?" Grace felt a rush of fear. This was the moment she had dreaded. Daniel hesitated, glancing nervously toward the kitchen as panic washed over him. He quickly gathered himself. "Oh, that's our head chef, Michael," he lied smoothly, forcing a grin. Grace's stomach tied itself in knots. She had anticipated this, the way they would overlook her contributions. But Lang wasn't easily deceived. He raised an eyebrow, his sharp gaze narrowing. "I know Michael's cooking well," he replied slowly. "This tastes different, like it was made by someone else." He surveyed the restaurant, and before Daniel could intervene, he said loudly, "I'd like to meet the chef who created this." Daniel tensed. For the first time that night, his confident facade started to crumble. He looked back at the kitchen, and after a moment of tense silence, he gestured for Grace to come forward. A hush fell over the restaurant as Grace walked to Lang's table. She could feel the weight of many curious eyes watching her, some skeptical, others judgmental. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she faced the food critic. Lang's expression softened when he saw her. "You made this dish?" he asked, his interest genuine. Grace met his eyes and nodded. "Yes, sir. It's inspired by a recipe from my family. For the first time in years, Grace found the courage to speak her mind without fear. Lang looked at her with genuine admiration. "Well, Grace, that's wonderful," he said. "It's hard to find true flavors like yours. It's rare to enjoy something so authentic." Grace whispered a thank you, filled with a sense of pride she had never experienced before. The next morning, Grace arrived at the restaurant early, hoping to stay unnoticed. But when she stepped into the kitchen, she found Daniel standing there, gripping a newspaper tightly. His face was bright red with anger. "Can you believe this?" he shouted, throwing the paper down on the counter. Grace's eyes widened as she saw the front page headline, "A taste of something new at Crystal and Vine, a fresh talent emerges." Lang's review celebrated the true flavors of the dish, calling it a rare and meaningful culinary experience. Although he didn't mention Grace by name, it was clear he was hinting at someone other than Michael. The restaurant staff whispered to one another. Michael, with his jaw clenched, avoided making eye contact with her. "You got lucky," Daniel spat quietly, grabbing her arm. "Don't get any ideas. You're still just a waitress." But Grace didn't pay much attention to him anymore. For the first time in a long while, she felt something new. Hope. Word traveled fast. Customers began asking about the mystery chef who had earned Lang's fantastic review. For the first time, the spotlight wasn't on the restaurant. It was on Grace. But Daniel and Michael weren't ready to give up. They ramped up their efforts to keep her quiet. Daniel assigned her the toughest shifts, loaded her with extra tasks, and watched her every move closely. Michael and his loyal kitchen team acted like she was invisible, barely acknowledging her existence. One evening, a group of reporters visited the restaurant, eager to meet the chef behind the celebrated dish. As usual, Daniel tried to shift the focus back to Michael. But one reporter insisted, asking about Grace, the waitress rumored to have made the dish. Grace overheard their conversation, and something inside her snapped. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "I didn't just help with the dish," she said with confidence. "I'm the one who created it." Silence filled the room as everyone took in her words. "Do you have professional training?" one of the reporters asked. Grace nodded. "Yes. I graduated from a top culinary school and have worked in respected restaurants. But I got overlooked, simply because of how I look." Daniel's face turned red with anger. "That's enough, Grace," he snapped. "You're just a waitress." Grace held his gaze without flinching. "If you believe I'm just a waitress, then let the food speak for itself." In the days that followed, Grace's story spread beyond the walls of the restaurant. What started as quiet whispers turned into lively conversations, leading to a new reality that Daniel and Michael could no longer control. More and more customers started asking for Grace's dishes by name, refusing to accept meals cooked by anyone else. Former employees began to speak out, sharing their own experiences of unfair treatment at Crystal and Vine. Then came a pivotal moment, an investigation into the restaurant's hiring practices and management decisions. As pressure from the corporate level grew, Daniel and Michael were put on leave. The same men who had tried to silence Grace now found themselves in the spotlight. Amidst all this, something incredible happened. Grace received a call from Martin Lang. "Grace," he said warmly, "your story has really moved a lot of people. I want to offer you something special." "Something special?" she asked, curious. "I know someone who wants to invest in a new restaurant. When I shared your story with him, he was very interested. We believe your talent deserves to be showcased. How would you feel about opening your own restaurant?" Grace's heart raced at the thought of having her own place, a space where she could cook freely and share the flavors of her heritage, finally being recognized for her abilities. With tears in her eyes, she steadied her voice and replied, "I would love that." Months later, Soul and Spice opened, with eager customers waiting in line. The restaurant was a reflection of Grace's journey, inviting, colorful, and full of life. Guests came not only for the delicious food, but also to hear Grace's inspiring story. On opening night, Martin Lang sat at a corner table, watching Grace move through her kitchen with grace and confidence. When she paused to greet him, he smiled. "This place is fantastic, Grace," he told her. You've created something truly special." For the first time, Grace felt it too. She was no longer just a waitress in the background. She was a chef, a visionary, and a force to be celebrated. And as she looked around at her bustling restaurant, she realized her journey was just beginning.